This is Distant Replay. It's part two of Mike Tyson, The Knockout, the documentary that aired on ABC. You can find it on abc.com and on Hulu. One that we weren't aware of when we came across it when it first aired just a couple weeks ago, I think late May, early June. But we saw it. We're both big Mike Tyson fans. We said we got to go back and watch this, make it part of the show. So we did. We went back, watched part one. We did a recap of that documentary, learned a ton in part one, and went back through his childhood, into his boxing career, into his prime, his peak, before everything came crashing down for Mike Tyson. So today, we'll conclude the documentary. It's part two. A lot to go into. The rape trial and conviction, guilty verdict, everything surrounding that, which was wild. And I don't think either one of us knew everything happening away from the courtroom with that. And then also his return to the ring, the ultimate downfall, end of his career, and then his rebirth, which has been really remarkable to see. So there's a lot to get into today on this episode of Distant Replay. I'm Ben George. He is Mike Noto. And Mike, part two, we knew it was going to be about, the rape and about the crime aspect of his career. And that was really a very, very big part of this documentary, but I think it's fair that they did that because it is a big part of his career, and there was so much happening surrounding that case.
And the way they covered it in this documentary opened my eyes to a lot of details about it that I honestly was not aware of. And it's another example, Ben, of what we mentioned in our last recap of part one, is that this documentary could have been 4 or 5 parts, and they would have had plenty of content.
Yeah, there's no question. And I don't think either one of us were following it that closely. We knew what was happening with Mike Tyson, but we didn't really know all the details surrounding everything that's happened. So let's kind of get into that to start things off, because that again is really like the first half of this part two. It's a big part. So the Indiana Black Expo, that's where everything went down. This was in Indianapolis, 1991. Tyson in the prime of his career, right? Top of the world. We've already kind of documented that from part one of how big he is, his presence in America and the world, honestly. Now, number one, I don't know anything about the Indiana Black Expo. I looked it up. It still happens today. But for a Black Expo taking place every year, there was a huge deal, obviously, by the clips here and everybody that showed up to it. I never would have guessed this was taking place in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I've never heard of this, obviously, and like yourself, like you mentioned, a huge event, though. There's several people in this documentary talking about how big of an event it was. And just look, it attracted a star at the level of Mike Tyson. And remember, we're right after the loss to Buster Douglas. But Mike Tyson is still like a huge name, because I think people thought like, oh yeah, that loss to Buster Douglas was kind of a fluke. Mike Tyson will be back kind of thing.
Yeah. And
he's in this Indiana Black Expo. There's a beauty pageant there. What was it? Miss Black America?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And they show videos of Tyson sort of mingling with the contestants of this beauty pageant. And what did you think about those clips they showed? I thought it was kind of a weird vibe, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of cringe a little bit. And the clips are like kind of behind this, like, I guess, extra footage, right? They shot a lot of promos, I think, for local TV stations and that sort of thing. And, they would show the reshoots, but, they had him kind of standing in a room with a bunch of contestants, and, he was trying to make like a rhyme, but it just felt very odd. And a couple of the women that were there were in this documentary and kind of described his overall demeanor, where he just kind of would stare at these women and just kind of lust at them. And it felt very uncomfortable for everyone. And that's what brought us to Desiree Washington, who was the victim in this case. We get introduced to her. They have some footage of her. She's from Rhode Island, only 18 years old at the time, which I don't think I really was aware of. And you kind of hear her. She was one of the people, and you got to remember, this is a guy, an athlete making a lot of money, who was married to Robin Givens. He's a very sought after person. So it's no surprise that a lot of the younger females were very attracted to Tyson, and she was one of those. And Tyson, it seemed like from the way he was going around that room that he was free to do and say whatever he wanted to. And even it seemed like he was encouraged to do so, right? Even to the point where like he was saying some pretty crude things to the girls.
Yeah, we got some behind the scenes with some of the girls, like present day, that were in that beauty pageant. And they said, like, initially, we're like, hey, it's Mike Tyson, this is going to be cool. We're going to get to meet Mike Tyson. He's a famous guy. But then, like, as the kind of week went on, with, like, Tyson kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, like, creeping most of them out, Most people kind of shied away from him, but there were some that were still, attracted to him and his celebrity. And I did not realize how small Desiree Washington was, like in stature. Did you realize that? And I had no idea she was 18. Like
No.
that totally took me by surprise. But yeah, and they just talk about how sometime that week of the pageant, Tyson basically, it made it sound like he approached like several of the contestants to go out on dates with him. Isn't that what they made it sound like?
It just seemed like he was coming on to everybody. It seemed like, yeah. Until finally she took him up on that offer, and that's kind of what happened. They ended up back in the hotel room, and that's where everything went down. And Tyson still denies anything happened that wasn't consensual. Desiree's story is different, but we get all the context around it, and I had no clue kind of any of the circumstances surrounding the rape. This kind of opened my eyes a lot because I had no clue what was going on. This huge event, he's kind of one of the star guests of this big event. I had no clue.
Yeah, look, I knew he was on trial for rape. I knew he got convicted of rape, but some of the details they shared, basically, and once it got to trial, his attorney's sort of defense that he put on for Mike Tyson, I thought was really bizarre, wasn't it?
Yeah. So before we get into that, I thought number one, the press conference they had after he was charged with rape, where basically like Don King's like representing him. I mean, look, you feel how you feel about Don King. I've never been a huge fan of Don King and his antics, but it was pretty disgusting the way he was acting coming into a press conference where, his boxer is accused of rape, and he's kind of like, only in America, still doing his whole like marketing spiel. And it just felt disgusting. And the fact that he was up there like speaking for Tyson in that situation, it shows that Tyson had really no guidance, right, around him. Nobody on his team could give him guidance. Like, hey, this is maybe a good time to have your lawyer up there speaking for you, not Don King in this situation.
Yeah, up until Don King got on the podium to talk about the matter at hand, you would think he was going there to promote a title fight.
Yeah,
that's how he was acting essentially. And you're right; he should have had some kind of legal counsel up there, because I think in the public eye that made Tyson look pretty bad.
It did, and even like not giving him any guidance on what to say, because I wrote down the comment while he was kind of going through his defense of why it never happened. He said, I love all women. He said, my mom is a woman, right? So like it's that defense, like when somebody that's racist that says I've got a black friend, I can't be racist. It's like my mom's a woman, I couldn't have raped a woman. Like that whole thing just made no sense to me, and it was very tough watching that press conference knowing that he just doesn't have any help, right? He's had a tough upbringing, not to defend anything he did, but he has no clue what he should be saying up there at that point. It has nobody guiding him.
Yeah, no. Not only does he have Don King up there trying to talk about legal matters, but he also probably has no PR team apparently.
None. Yeah.
Like none. So, just crazy from that perspective. Good job bringing up that press conference because it was really bizarre.
Yeah. So that trial, yes. So the trial, getting into it. Yeah. Vince Fuller. So Don King, of course, is the guy that finds the lawyer, right?
Of course.
He tracks down a guy. Who knows what the relationship is there? I mean, a pretty high profile lawyer out of D.C., but this is definitely not his specialty. And so he comes in, and essentially they call it the creep defense, where he basically just kind of throws Tyson under the bus, right? I mean, very, very odd approach.
Yeah, basically the defense is, hey, my client is a lot of things. He's violent, he's this, he's that. There's a lot of deficiencies with Mike Tyson, but he's not a rapist. That was basically the defense that they put forward. And it was very, very heavily criticized, even in the moment, like during the days of the trial, and has been really criticized since that. The approach that defense attorney took just made it look like you said, it was not his specialty, and really put Tyson at a disadvantage come trial.
Now, I can't imagine, Mike, if this trial took place in 2021, because it's just there's so much going on around the trial, outside of the trial. So, number one, you had people scalping tickets to sit in the courtroom, which
I had never heard of. I had never heard of before.
And I didn't know they gave seats out like that, right? I had no clue. And
could you buy them on Ticketmaster? Like, how did you get a ticket to the courthouse?
I had no idea, but there's people scalping them for like $100 to go sit in a rape trial. I mean, it's tough to watch. But beyond that, you had this whole kind of dynamic outside the courtroom where it became a big racial matter. It became pretty intense, and it's tough because you have a black man and a black woman here involved in this, and there are people, a lot of the black community that is directing their anger towards this 18-year-old woman that was raped, and even to the point where, and I don't remember any of this, Mike, and if this was today, this would be pretty wild, but a church embracing Mike Tyson and bringing him up to defend him and talk about and let him kind of speak in front of this congregation and talk and kind of defend his reputation. All this guy's, being on trial for rape. There was so much of this going on. Of course, you had Al Sharpton, Don King taking him around and trying to pitch Mike and defend his reputation, whatever else. But I couldn't believe the back and forth and everybody that was attacking the victim. I mean, we see this a lot in rape cases, right? It happens anyway. But, I mean, something as high profile as this, it was tough to watch.
Yeah, it was very public with the way everything went down. And there was very strong opinions on each side. And in the middle, you had this young 18-year-old girl, and I like you mentioned, I was not aware of kind of the racial undertones of this. I mean, there's people who thought in this documentary, that pretty much said that, what did she expect going up to his hotel room? That kind of thing, like she went up to his hotel room, late at night. What did she think was going to happen? Essentially shaming her for, going on a date with Mike Tyson and maybe putting herself in a bad spot. That was like a big thought at the time. And also, maybe she should have thought twice before she brought these charges against, a very, very high profile black male. Like, what is the impact this is going to have on black males as a whole by her doing this? Like, not to focus on, hey, what happened in that hotel room, but sort of things outside that.
Yeah, the thought is, this is somebody's orchestrating these accusations to bring Mike Tyson down, a successful black man. That's kind of a lot of the angle to this. And when he was found guilty and given 6 years, the reaction still seemed to be overwhelmingly in his favor. I mean, people still saying, free Mike Tyson, he didn't do this. These are all fake accusations. You have Don King throwing around lynching and hanging in the media. I mean, it was all tough to watch, and I guess I am, again, thankful it didn't happen now, because it would be nonstop everywhere, comments on social media, videos, clips, I mean, everything. Very tough situation. It could have been a lot worse for Desiree Washington probably, too, if it had been a different era.
Yeah, I just think that this would have – I don't know if you get as much victim bashing this day and age. I think the world's changed a lot in that perspective. And remember – just from a sheer media standpoint and the coverage, I think the coverage would have been 10x, even just if it happened after the OJ trial. Yeah. Remember, we're still before the OJ trial. There was a lot of media coverage of this trial, but not as much as even there would be, 2, 3, 4 years later for the OJ trial. So, I think from that perspective, maybe that's why we weren't aware of some of the little details, Ben, because I think we're a little bit younger at that point, but also I don't think it was as like everywhere you look,
Right.
Definitely covered, but not like national news, the whole show dedicated to the Mike Tyson trial.
Yeah. So he tried to appeal it and it got denied. So Tyson went to jail in Indianapolis. And Mike, all I could think of when he was in jail in Indianapolis is how Spike Lee had to bet with Reggie Miller in the Eastern Conference Finals that if he won, if Reggie had to go visit him in prison. And apparently it was like every celebrity was going through there visiting him.
Yeah, a lot of celebrities were going through there visiting him. I didn't realize that was like a thing either.
No.
But most notably during this time, who was also going to visit him a lot is Don King. Yeah. So Don King is positioning himself at this time. So when Tyson gets out of prison, and if Tyson still wants to box, that Don King is going to be there for, the revival of Mike Tyson. So that's a very important storyline.
Yeah. So, as in the background, I guess in the background of this rape trial is boxing, right? Boxing's still happening. You've got Riddick Bowe, you got Holyfield emerging, Foreman's making his comeback. So boxing's still in a pretty good place as Tyson kind of reemerges onto the scene. And then meanwhile, everybody, the people around Tyson, trainers and that sort of thing, are telling him, listen, this is the time to cut ties with Don King. It's time to move on and go a different direction. Meanwhile, Don King obviously is trying to hold on to this relationship with Tyson because he, obviously sees the money, the dollar signs here. And Tyson goes against everybody around him, sticks with Don King. So that could have been a spot where maybe things changed, but I think all this all needed to come crashing down at some point, right? So I think it all kind of worked out. But he returns, and Tyson's in a good, like, he comes out boxing pretty well. And I remember that return, Mike. It was a big deal when he came back and started fighting again.
It was.
I don't remember, like, it's all such a different era now. I don't remember any of this, like, I can't believe this guy's back in the ring fighting. You know, he just accused of rape. Like, he should be trying to better himself. Like, there wasn't anybody protesting fights. Like, he was embraced when he came back to the ring. Like, let's see if he still got it.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a subsection of people who were like, "Hey, this guy just got out of jail for rape. Should he be boxing?" But those were not the overwhelming voices you heard. It was like, "Hey, we like boxing. Mike Tyson's entertaining. Let's see if he can make a comeback." And that comeback was a big thing, right?
Huge.
And he fights fighters where he gets to the point, some tune-ups, for lack of a better word to put it, until he's in the ring with Evander Holyfield. A fight I think we all remember.
Yeah, and he's doing really well up until he runs into these guys that are at the top of the heavyweight division now. And I remember these fights specifically, Mike. Holyfield, he lost to Holyfield, then he gets a rematch. And the rematch is the one that was, again, highly anticipated. Can Mike Tyson overcome Holyfield and win this? And, like, I get, like, Holyfield had a good approach, right? Let me just frustrate this guy. And I remember this kind of being, like, the time when boxing changed a little bit, where there's a lot more grappling and holding. This is Holyfield's approach. He would headbutt Tyson some, just get him frustrated, work his body a lot, to the point where Tyson just had enough and snapped and bit his ear. In that moment, I'll never forget it. I mean, when it happened, dude, it was crazy. I know you watched it. I had the fight too. It was wild when that happened.
Yeah, so these fights with Holyfield were a huge deal.
Huge.
To be honest, they're the last, like, heavyweight boxing matches that I could remember being this big of a deal. But I always remember the first Holyfield fight, just seeing how much bigger Holyfield was than Tyson. I remember thinking, man, this is the first time I'm looking at Mike Tyson, and I'm thinking, like, he's not as good as the guy in the ring that, that he's fighting. Holyfield just a lot more prepared, beat Tyson. As you mentioned, that headbutting strategy, a little bit controversial. And Tyson, when he took that chunk out of Holyfield's ear, I remember where I was, who I was sitting next to, and watching it and just being like, did he bite his ear? Mm-hmm. Like, did that really just happen? And they started to show the replays, things of that nature. And it was, like, shocking. That's one of the most shocking. That and the Malice in the Palace were, like, the two most shocking live sporting events that I've ever watched on TV, because you couldn't believe what you were watching.
Yeah, it was crazy. And then Jim Gray, he pops up again. He's doing the interview after that fight, and dude, that interview took some balls, man, because Tyson is in a very, very dark spot at that point, and he is fuming, and he's defending his actions. Right, look what happened to me. I got to go back to my kid with this gash above my eye from the headbutt, and Gray stands his ground and asks him the tough questions. That was one where, like, I would think in the back of your mind, you're like, I might get slugged here.
Yeah, and you find out later in this documentary that him and Jim Gray are friends.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some, like, mutual respect there, because Gray did stand in there and ask him the tough questions during this moment. But Jim Gray and Pat O'Brien seem to weave their way into every episode we do, regardless of the sport, the era, or whatever. It really is incredible. But yeah, there's a lot of people close to Mike Tyson who feel like, man, this is it. He may continue to fight, but there's going to be no coming back from this. And doing what he did in such a savage way, on a hugely watched boxing match.
Yeah. And Jim Gray was he's been a boxing interviewer for a while in the ring, and does a good job getting some great sound bites on those guys. Then he had the Lennox Lewis fight. Again, another huge one that was like, I kind of remember, thinking about it back to that, and I watched it with some friends, pay-per-view, and I think my thought going into it was like, I think Mike still got it. I'm hoping he still got it, but something tells me he probably doesn't. And that was the fight that we all just were like, man, this was a humongous letdown, and the Tyson reign is now officially over. Yeah,
this was when it was like after this fight, like, Mike Tyson as a boxer, like, left my brain. So, like, he would fight after this. But, like, him, like, that part of my brain, I was like, Mike Tyson, the boxer, man, what a cool thing to watch. It was over after this fight, like you mentioned, because Lennox Lewis completely dismantled him.
That was a tough one. So then from that point, he was in a very, very bad spot. And he was doing a lot of drugs, a lot of cocaine, just I think trying to face the reality of no longer being a boxer, a successful boxer, and what he's going to do with his life. And then he lost to Kevin McBride, which was just an embarrassment. The fact that McBride was confident going in to fight him, and they got $150,000 for it, and it was a bad scene altogether. And then Mike Tyson lost his daughter, and that was I think that was something that I just did not really know about, and a very, very, very sad story. But it seemed like that's what really kind of changed him. There's a couple turning points in his life, right? The pigeon incident early in his childhood, passing of a couple of the people that helped raise him, and then this is another big event in his life.
Yeah, and what they described happened to his 4-year-old daughter is just heartbreaking. I mean, they basically said that she was playing on a treadmill or near a treadmill, and somehow the cord from the treadmill ended up choking her to death. Yeah. That is just like terrible. I mean, not that there's any good way for that to happen, but what a terrible story that I had no idea about.
Right.
And he did an interview they showed on here talking about it, and I don't know how he even did an interview on it, or even got through the interview. But again, major turning point in his life, as they discuss well in this documentary. And then I think from there, the next time I know Mike Tyson entered my realm was when he was on the movie The Hangover.
Yeah, and this is all around the same time frame. I think I would assume the movie was filmed before the death of his daughter, because his daughter died in 2009. I think that's the same time that Hangover was released. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, Tyson was off my radar altogether. Had been for like 10 years, probably, I would guess, somewhere in there. And then he just all of a sudden it reappeared in this movie, and it was like the most epic appearance in a movie. When it happened, it was crazy.
Yeah, and the thing was whoever the casting director was, I assume it's a casting director. I'm not a Hollywood guy.
Yeah.
But whoever they could have picked so many people for this role, right?
Yeah.
But they needed to pick someone who people thought about Las Vegas when they thought about him. People, the guy's a little bit bizarre, but still could be relevant if we portray him in the right light. And they nailed it with Mike Tyson. Yeah. I mean, they absolutely nailed it. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah.
And he was so funny. The actors in The Hangover were really funny. When he punched Zach Galifianakis in the face after singing the song,
Yeah, the song was even perfect too.
That song had a revival after that scene, that first scene he's in, when he punches. What was his name in the movie? Zach Galifianakis. I don't know how to say his name, but what was his name in the movie?
Oh God,
I can't remember. Oh, we're gonna get crushed for this. But that was a funny scene. The whole thing was perfect, and that was the thing. You were like, "Oh, Mike Tyson, no way!" It was like a thing you talked about after you saw the movie. When you were telling people how it was, you were like, "Oh, Mike Tyson's in that movie."
Yeah, Alan was his name.
Alan, yeah, how could I forget? Jeez.
Yeah, that was just, I don't know, that of all movies, I love The Hangover #1. I mean, Hangover was one of the great movies. There were some really good comedy films in that kind of time frame, but that appearance is still one of the greatest ones I can remember, for me at least. And yeah, I still think about that. When I think about Mike Tyson, I think about Mike Tyson, I think of The Hangover, and vice versa. It just was pretty remarkable. But during this time too, so his daughter dies, and again, he's in a very bad spot. But this, I think, kind of changes his whole perspective on life, right? And from this kind of point forward, he starts kind of going on an apology tour, the Oprah interview with Evander and Tyson. You could tell that Tyson's legitimately remorseful in these situations. And then I didn't remember the appearance on Friday Night Lights, and now we were at ESPN, so we were around a lot of these Friday night fights events that were going on. And Teddy Atlas, one of the commentators on those fights. I didn't realize Tyson showed up at one of these and made it a point to go up to Teddy to apologize for what happened earlier in his life when they had the falling out, and Teddy put the gun to his head. I don't really remember that happening, but that was a pretty special time.
Yeah, that was a special moment. Teddy Atlas talking about it in this, I thought was really good to see. You always like to see when two people have so much success together, right? And then something brings them apart, but you associate one with the other. When I think of Mike Tyson, one of the first 3 or 4 people I think of is Teddy Atlas. You always like to see them sort of come back together, I think of that when I think of totally different circumstances, but when I think of Shaq and Kobe, had a great time period together. It ended really bad, but they eventually were able to reconcile and be friends, So again, totally different circumstance, but that's the feeling I got when I saw Atlas and Tyson.
Yeah, so the final couple segments of this documentary were, about his reemergence and kind of finding himself, and it's a really good story. And there's a lot of layers to Mike Tyson, right? There's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad, probably more bad than good, and a lot of that's credit to his upbringing. But he had, I wasn't really aware of his Mike Tyson on, I don't remember what it was called, the Spike Lee kind of live show he did where he went back through his life. But he faced a lot of those demons, his mom and his not knowing who his dad was and those types of things. And this whole rebirth has been great to watch. And you can't ever defend his actions in the 90s and the way he treated women. But I'm all for forgiveness and somebody getting the second chance that truly appreciates life and is going about it and trying to make a difference and trying to be a positive force around people. And I love the Nightline interview with him as he was preparing to fight Roy Jones in 2020, just about where he is in life, right? In a pretty good spot. And then, kind of finished with him around his kids, not knowing, what happened to his daughter in 2009, here 10 years later, another decade where we are. And he's out with his son walking the property. And, the last scene, I love the last scene where he asks his son, hey, you know how much I love you, right? And gave him a high five. And, he's there to be the positive influence on his son's life and his children's life that he never had. And I think it takes a lot of courage to be in that spot. And it really, truly seems like Mike Tyson's a different person and a better person now. And I'm sincerely happy for him.
Yeah, the end of this basically portrays it as he's found happiness. He's found, a purpose in life with his kids. It was a long, winding road to get to that point. Again, he did some things that were abhorrent. He did some things that were totally, got him into a lot of trouble. But it seems like he's come out the other side. And I hope, I like having Mike Tyson. You see Mike Tyson in these different things now, and it's always good seeing him, and there's some interviews with Tyson, like on YouTube, things of that nature, where it's very raw interviews, like him sort of like a retrospective on his life and the life he's lived and all the crazy stories that have come about throughout the years. And, it makes for interesting content. And most importantly, it's good to see it's good to see a comeback story. Again, not getting into, what he did to Desiree Washington, in no way are we saying, that wasn't terrible. But it seems as though he's on the right path now.
It does indeed. And he's actually boxing this year. Are you aware of that, Mike? Like doing exhibitions? Maybe he's fighting Lewis this summer. He's trying to fight Holyfield again.
Really?
Yeah, I think I don't know if that's actually. I don't know the latest, but they're trying to get. He's trying to kind of revive things and have some of these exhibition fights. So maybe that's why this was done when it was. I still don't know the timing on this documentary, but I'm glad I went back and watched it because it was great. I credit ABC for this production. Still surprised it wasn't part of ESPN or 30 for 30 under that umbrella, but would highly recommend going back and watching both of these parts.
This is a must watch. Okay. If you've been a sports fan for the last 20, 25 years, it's a must watch. I agree 100% with what you said. If they got 10 parts out of Jordan, 5 parts out of OJ, they could have gotten 3 or 4 part documentary out of Tyson and made it like a feature summer documentary. It seems like that's the way they've been trending lately, ESPN. But for whatever reason, ABC News got this documentary. They did a very good job with it. And it's very easy to find, ABC News, and I recommend going to do it.
Very good, Mike. Well, thanks for going through that with us. This is our documentary recap. We do one of those every week. We have true crime. We also go back and watch games as well. So please follow the podcast. We would appreciate that. You don't want to miss an episode. Share the podcast with a friend. Let them know about it. And then please leave us a review, rating, like the YouTube video, subscribe there as well. You can find us on all the platforms. And we enjoy doing this and really enjoy and appreciate your feedback.
Yeah, as always, do everything Ben just said to do, please. It helps us a lot. And we'll see you guys a little bit later this week. Until next time.